In the summer of 1943, a corpse washed ashore on the Spanish coast that would change the course of World War II forever. Clutched in the dead man's hand was a briefcase containing military secrets so sensitive that they would redirect Hitler's entire war strategy. But here's the twist that makes this story absolutely extraordinary. The corpse was a homeless vagrant who had died from rat poison. The military secrets were completely fabricated, and the entire operation was designed by British intelligence to fool the most paranoid dictator in history. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, a deception so audacious that it sounds like fiction, yet it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Picture this: you're Adolf Hitler in 1943, and your empire is cracking under Allied pressure. North Africa has fallen, your Italian allies are wavering, and you know with absolute certainty that the Allies are planning their next move. The question isn't whether they'll invade Europe through the Mediterranean. The question is where. Any fool looking at a map could see the most obvious target. Sicily sits like a stepping stone between Allied forces in North Africa and the soft underbelly of Axis Europe. It's so obvious that it has to be the target, right? That's exactly what British intelligence was counting on Hitler to think, and then completely change his mind about. The masterminds behind this elaborate game of chess with human lives were two unlikely partners working in the shadows of British intelligence. Ewan Montagu, a brilliant barrister from an aristocratic background who had traded courtrooms for the secret world of naval intelligence, and Charles Cholmondeley, a nearsighted Royal Air Force officer who had been seconded to MI5. These two men would spend months crafting what historians now call one of the most successful deception operations in military history. But their plan didn't emerge from thin air. It came from the creative mind of a man who would later become famous for creating the world's most famous fictional spy. In September 1939, as Europe plunged into war, Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming circulated a document that would later inspire James Bond's most outrageous adventures. The Trout Memo, as it came to be known, compared deceiving enemies in wartime to fly fishing. Fleming wrote that a fisherman casts patiently all day, frequently changing venues and lures, always trying to attract fish with something sent out from his boat. The memo contained 54 different ways to fool the enemy, but number 28 was so outrageous that even Fleming called it a suggestion, not a very nice one. The idea was simple in concept, but ghoulish in execution. Find a corpse, dress it as a British soldier, stuff it with fake documents, and let enemy forces discover it. Fleming admitted the idea came from a 1937 crime novel, but in the desperate circumstances of 1943, fiction was about to become deadly reality. By early 1943, the strategic situation in the Mediterranean had reached a critical point. Allied forces had crushed Axis resistance in North Africa, and everyone knew the next step was an invasion of southern Europe. Winston Churchill had even announced publicly that the Allies would attack the underbelly of the Axis, especially Italy.
Through Italy.
The problem was that Hitler wasn't stupid. German intelligence could read maps just as well as anyone else, and Sicily was the obvious target. If the Allies wanted any chance of success, they needed to convince Hitler to look somewhere else.
We must consider
The broader deception campaign, codenamed Operation Barclay, was already underway. British intelligence was creating fake armies, broadcasting misleading radio chatter, and strategically purchasing Greek maps and currency to suggest an imminent Balkan invasion. Hitler was known to be obsessed with protecting the Balkans, the source of crucial raw materials for the German war machine, including copper, bauxite, chrome, and oil. But these efforts alone weren't enough. They needed something more convincing, more personal, more human. They needed a dead man to carry their lies. The challenge facing Montagu and Cholmondeley was unprecedented in the annals of espionage. Step one of their plan was simultaneously simple and impossible. Find a corpse. Not just any corpse, but a very specific type of corpse. The body had to be young, male, and recently deceased. It had to have no next of kin who might ask awkward questions. Most importantly, it had to be fresh enough to convince German pathologists that it belonged to someone who had drowned at sea while carrying vital military intelligence. In wartime London, with bodies piling up from bombing raids and military casualties, you might think corpses would be easy to find. You would be wrong. The top-secret nature of their work meant Montagu and Cholmondeley couldn't simply waltz into a morgue and request a body for their spy operation. They needed help from someone with access to the recently deceased and the discretion to ask no questions. That someone was Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's most famous pathologist, who connected them with Bentley Purchase, the coroner for the Street, Pancras district of London. Purchase understood the gravity of their request and began his own covert search for the perfect candidate. On January 28, 1943, Purchase contacted Montague with news that he had located a suitable body. The corpse belonged to Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old vagrant who had died from eating rat poison containing phosphorus. Purchase assured them that the small amount of poison in the system would not be detectable in a body that was supposed to have been floating in seawater for several days. When Montague worried that the undernourished corpse didn't look like a fit military officer, Purchase dryly observed that he didn't need to look like a field officer, only a staff officer who was more accustomed to desk work than physical training. Behind this clinical discussion of corpses and deception lay a deeply human tragedy. Glyndwr Michael had been born in Aberbargod, a small town in South Wales, where he had worked part-time jobs as a gardener and labourer. His father, Thomas, a coal miner, had killed himself when Michael was just 15 years old. His mother died when he was 31, leaving him completely alone in the world. Homeless, friendless, depressed, and penniless, Michael had drifted to London, where he lived on the streets during one of the harshest winters in memory. On a bitter January night in 1943, Michael was found in an abandoned warehouse near King's Cross, seriously ill from mesting rat poison. Whether his death was suicide or the desperate act of a starving man eating poisoned bread crusts intended for rats, no one would ever know. He lingered for 2 days in St. Pancras Hospital before dying at the age of 36. His death certificate listed the cause as phosphorus poisoning, took rat poison, bid to kill himself while of unsound mind. In life, Glyndwr Michael had been forgotten by society, ignored by passers-by, and abandoned by fortune. In death, he was about to become one of the most important figures in the Allied war effort. Purchase agreed to preserve the body in a mortuary refrigerator at exactly 4 degrees Celsius. Any colder, and the flesh would freeze, which would be obvious when the body thawed. Any warmer and decomposition would accelerate beyond the point of usefulness. He warned Montague and Cholmondeley that they had a 3-month window to use the body before it became unsuitable for their purposes. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the Sicily invasion hung in the balance. With their grim, raw material secured, Montague and Cholmondeley faced the monumental task of transforming a Welsh vagrant into a convincing Royal Marines officer. This wasn't simply a matter of putting a uniform on a corpse. They were creating a complete human being from scratch, someone whose life story would need to withstand the scrutiny of German intelligence analysts trained to spot deception. Every detail mattered because one inconsistency, one overlooked element, could expose the entire operation and doom thousands of Allied soldiers to death on Sicilian beaches. The creation of Major William Martin required the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would have impressed the most demanding fiction writers. Born on March 29, 1907, according to his fabricated identity documents, Martin was son of John the Belover Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. His military record showed a competent but unremarkable career in the Royal Marines, exactly the sort of officer who might be trusted to carry sensitive documents, but wouldn't be so important that his loss would trigger massive investigations. But a convincing identity required more than official paperwork. Montague understood that the Germans would examine every aspect of their discovery, so he created what he called pocket litter, the accumulated detritus of daily life that makes a person real. Martin carried ticket stubs from a London theatre, the performance departure night before his suppose, bills from his Savile Row tailor complaining about overdue payments, and a stern letter from his bank manager about his overdraft. There was a receipt for an engagement ring from a prestigious London jeweller, and most importantly, passionate love letters from his fiancée. The fiancée herself was a stroke of genius. Pam was portrayed as a vivacious young woman madly in love with her William, counting the days until his return so they could be married. Her letters were filled with intimate details, inside jokes, and the kind of casual references that lovers share. She worried about his dangerous work, teased him about his terrible handwriting, and signed her letters with lipstick kisses. To create Pam's photograph, which Martin carried in his wallet, The team recruited Jean Leslie, a young MI5 clerk, who posed for pictures without ever knowing the true purpose. Her image would become the face of a romance that existed only in the imagination of British intelligence officers. The attention to detail extended to Martin's physical appearance and personal habits. His fingernails were carefully manicured to suggest someone who worked at a desk rather than in the field. His uniform was properly worn and weathered to avoid the telltale signs of brand-new equipment. Even his underwear was carefully selected to match what a middle-class officer might wear. Religious items were included to suggest a man of faith, while theater programs and book receipts painted him as culturally sophisticated. Every element was designed to build a picture of a complex, believable human being. The documents that Martin carried were the beating heart of the deception, crafted with the precision of master forgers and the cunning of chess grandmasters thinking 20 moves ahead. The first critical letter came from General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Harold Alexander, the Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean. Written in the informal tone of old military colleagues, the letter discussed troop deployments and strategic concerns with casual authority that would be impossible to fake convincingly. Nye's letter was a masterpiece of misdirection, wrapped in apparent candor. He wrote about the challenges of organizing the upcoming invasion of Greece, mentioning specific beach code names and unit assignments, with the kind of detail that could only come from genuine planning documents. The letter referenced Operation Husky, describing it as the invasion of Greece rather than its actual target of Sicily. Most cunningly, Nye acknowledged that the Germans would probably expect an attack on Sicily, dismissing it as an obvious feint designed to mask the real assault on Greece and Sardinia. The second crucial document came from Lord Louis Mountbatten, head of Combined Operations, writing to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commander of the Mediterranean Fleet. Mountbatten's letter introduced Major Martin as an expert in amphibious landing techniques, someone whose expertise would be valuable in the upcoming operations. The letter included seemingly casual references to recent military setbacks, including a rueful acknowledgement of lessons learned from the disastrous Dieppe raid. Most significantly, it contained an apparently throwaway joke about sardines that was actually a coded reference to Sardinia, further reinforcing the deception about Allied intentions. These weren't simply forged documents. They were psychological weapons designed to exploit Hitler's existing fears and strategic paranoia. The intelligence team knew that the German dictator was obsessed with protecting the Balkans, viewing the region as essential to his war machine's survival. By confirming his worst fears about a Balkan invasion, the letters would push Hitler toward decisions that served Allied interests while appearing to serve his own. The physical preparation of Major Martin's body required delicate work that on the Mac Borderiba. The corpse was dressed in the uniform of a Royal Marines officer, complete with proper insignia and decorations. His personal effects were distributed naturally throughout his clothing, creating the impression of a man who had been carrying these items during normal daily activities. The briefcase containing the vital documents was secured to his wrist with a chain, the standard procedure for couriers carrying classified materials. The body was then placed in a specially designed steel canister filled with dry ice to preserve it during transport. The container was labeled as optical instruments to avoid arousing curiosity among dock workers or railway staff who might handle it during its journey from London to Scotland. Every aspect of the transport was planned with military precision because discovery at this stage would not only doom the operation, but potentially reveal British intelligence capabilities to German agents operating throughout the United Kingdom. The final phase of preparation took place in Scotland, where HMS Seraph waited to carry Major Martin to his destiny. The submarine had been chosen carefully for this mission. Her crew had already proven their discretion during previous special operations, and Captain Lieutenant Norman Jewell had demonstrated both courage and reliability in dangerous waters. The crew was told only that they were carrying out a special intelligence operation whose success could save thousands of Allied lives. As the submarine prepared to depart,
listen carefully.
Tension filled every compartment.
We have a crucial mission.
The success of Operation Mincemeat would depend not just on German intelligence discovering the body, but on their belief in its authenticity. If Hitler suspected deception, he might reinforce Sicily instead of weakening it, turning the Allied invasion into a bloodbath. The stakes could not have been higher, and everyone involved understood that they were gambling with the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers who would soon storm the beaches of whatever target Hitler chose to defend most heavily. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph slipped beneath the dark waters of the Mediterranean, carrying her deadly cargo toward the Spanish coast. The submarine moved through hostile waters where German U-boats prowled and Axis aircraft patrolled overhead. But her mission was far more dangerous than any conventional warfare. In the steel canister secured in her forewall, the keyed compartment lay to deceiving the most powerful military machine in Europe. Captain Jewel had chosen his approach carefully, selecting a position off the coast of Huelva, where Spanish fishing boats operated regularly and where pro-German officials were known to cooperate with Nazi intelligence networks. The selection of Huelva as the drop point was no accident. British intelligence had studied Spanish coastal communities for months, analyzing which locations offered the best combination of discovery, probability, and German access. Huelva possessed a crucial advantage that made it perfect for their needs. The local authorities, Spanish, maintained friendly relationships with German intelligence operatives, particularly a German agent known to British intelligence as reliable and thorough in his reporting to Berlin. If Major Martin's body washed ashore near Huelva, the documents would almost certainly reach German hands within hours rather than days. Weather conditions on that fateful morning were ideal for the deception. Light winds and gentle currents would carry the body naturally toward shore, without appearing to have been deliberately placed. The tides were perfectly timed to deposit Major Martin on the beach during daylight hours, when Spanish fishermen would be most likely to discover him. Every environmental factor had been calculated to create the appearance of a tragic accident rather than an elaborate intelligence operation. As HMS Seraph reached the predetermined coordinates, Captain Jewel ordered the submarine to surface under cover of darkness. The crew worked quickly and quietly, knowing that every moment on the surface increased their vulnerability to enemy detection. Major Martin's body was carefully removed from its container and fitted with a Mae West life jacket that had been artificially aged to suggest prolonged exposure to seawater. The briefcase remained securely chained to his wrist, positioned naturally as if he had been attempting to protect the documents during his final moments. The moment of release was both solemn and surreal. Captain Jewel read aloud from the 39th Psalm, a brief but dignified farewell to the man who would never know how his death might save thousands of lives. The body was gently pushed into the Mediterranean waters, where the current immediately began carrying it toward the Spanish shore. As HMS Seraph slipped beneath the surface and began her journey back to base, Captain Jewel transmitted a coded message that would echo through the corridors of British intelligence. Mincemeat complete. The discovery unfolded exactly as British intelligence had hoped. Spanish fishermen found Major Martin's body floating near the shore and immediately notified local authorities. The Spanish Civil Guard took possession of the corpse and its attached briefcase, following standard procedures for handling military personnel washed up on neutral shores. Within hours, word of the discovery had reached German intelligence officers in the area, who immediately recognized the potential significance of a dead British officer carrying what appeared to be classified documents. The Spanish authorities faced a delicate diplomatic situation. As an officially neutral nation with secret sympathies toward Nazi Germany, Spain needed to balance its obligations under international law with its desire to maintain good relationships with both sides. The solution was elegant in its duplicity. The briefcase would be opened and examined by Spanish officials before being returned to British diplomatic representatives. But during this examination, German agents would have ample opportunity to photograph or copy any documents of interest. German intelligence officer Karl-Erich Kuhlenthal received copies of the documents within 24 hours of their discovery. Kuhlenthal was no amateur spy but a seasoned intelligence professional who had spent years developing networks throughout neutral Spain. His initial examination of the documents revealed what appeared to be genuine Allied planning materials of the highest classification level. The letters bore authentic-looking signatures, proper military formatting, and the kind of casual references that suggested genuine correspondence between senior commanders. More importantly, the documents confirmed what German strategic analysts had already begun to suspect. Hitler's obsession with protecting the Balkans had led many in the German high command to worry about Allied intentions in that region. The letters from Nye and Mountbatten seemed to validate these concerns, while simultaneously explaining why German intelligence had been picking up so many indicators pointing towards Sicily. It was all an elaborate deception designed to mask the real assault on Greece and Sardinia. Kuhlenthal's report to Berlin was thorough and enthusiastic. He had examined every aspect of the discovery and found no evidence of deception. The body showed appropriate signs of drowning and exposure to seawater. The documents were properly formatted and contained the kind of detailed information that would be impossible to fake convincingly. The personal effects found on Major Martin painted a picture of a real person with and authentic relationships, genuine concerns. Most convincingly,
this is
the
how we
Spanish
will
authorities
proceed.
had handled the
Yes,
discovery
understood.
in exactly the way they would handle
We need
any
to
similar
document
incident
everything.
involving military personnel from a belligerent nation. The report reached Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, within days of the body's discovery. Canaris was known for his cautious approach to intelligence analysis, but even his skeptical review could find no obvious flaws in the documents. The information was consistent with other intelligence reports about Allied troop movements and strategic planning. More significantly, it aligned perfectly with German assumptions about Allied intentions and capabilities. The documents quickly made their way up the German chain of command, each level adding its own analysis and commentary. Staff officers noted the consistency between the captured documents and their own strategic assessments. Intelligence analysts highlighted the quality of the information and the apparent authenticity of the sources. By the time the report reached Hitler's desk, it had been endorsed by virtually every level of the German military hierarchy. Hitler's reaction exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of British intelligence planners. The German dictator had long worried about Allied intentions in the Balkans, viewing the region as essential to his empire's survival. The captured documents confirmed his worst fears while providing specific details about Allied planning that seemed impossible to fabricate. On May 14, 1943, in a meeting with Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler declared that Sicily was clearly not the primary target and that Greece and Sardinia must be reinforced immediately. The orders that followed were music to Allied ears, though they wouldn't learn of their success until much later. Hitler commanded the 1st Panzer Division to move from France to Greece, along with 7 additional infantry divisions from Italy. Another 10 infantry divisions were redeployed from Italy to the Balkans, stripping the Italian peninsula of crucial defensive forces. Sardinia received massive reinforcements, including aircraft squadrons and naval elements that had been earmarked for Sicily's defense.
We have to pull back.
Hitler's
Our
conviction
forces are being
remained unshaken,
Sir, we're
as
losing
evidence
ground
mounted
rapidly.
that Sicily was
Nonsense.
indeed the Allied target.
We
German
cannot make that
intelligence
move.
continued to
It is too
report
risky.
Allied preparations for an assault on Sicily.
This is our chance.
But
Wait,
Hitler dismissed these
consider this
reports as
possibility.
confirmation that the deception was working exactly as the captured documents had described. The more obvious Sicily appeared as a target, the more convinced Hitler became that it was merely a feint designed to mask the real attack on Greece. The psychological dimension of Operation Mincemeat's success was as important as its strategic impact. Hitler's existing paranoia about Balkan security made him particularly susceptible to intelligence that confirmed his fears. His tendency to trust his own intuition over the advice of his generals meant that once he had decided the documents were genuine, no amount of contrary evidence could change his mind. British intelligence had not simply deceived the German military. They had exploited the psychological weaknesses of Germany's supreme leader. High-ranking Nazi officials did
need to
express some
reconsider
concerns
the
about the
eastern flank.
authenticity of the documents, with at least one senior figure reportedly telling Hitler that the discovery felt like a deception. However, these doubts were overwhelmed by the apparent quality of the intelligence and its alignment with existing German strategic assumptions. The very audacity of the deception worked in its favor, because few intelligence professionals could imagine that the British would risk such an elaborate operation on something as unreliable as a floating corpse. The success of Operation Mincemeat created a cascade of strategic advantages that extended far beyond the immediate tactical benefits. German forces that should have been defending Sicily were scattered across the Mediterranean, weakening Axis defensive capabilities at the crucial point of Allied attack. Supply lines that should have been strengthening Sicily's fortifications were redirected to Greece and Sardinia. Most importantly, the element of surprise that seemed impossible to achieve against such an obvious target had been restored through the simple expedient of making Hitler believe his own strategic analysis was wrong. As July 1943 approached and Allied invasion fleets assembled in North African ports, German defensive preparations reflected the success of British deception efforts. Sicily remained lightly defended compared to Greece and Sardinia, with many of its best units having been transferred to other theaters. The island's coastal fortifications received lower priority for reinforcement and supplies.
They're
German
leaving,
commanders
sir.
in Sicily
We
found
can't hold
themselves
them back.
pleading for additional
They're
troops and
just
equipment
leaving.
while watching their best units march away toward other destinations. The stage was set for one of the most decisive campaigns of World War II, and the odds had been tilted dramatically in favor of the Allies through the simple expedient of a dead vagrant carrying fake documents. Operation Mincemeat had achieved something that massive bombing campaigns and elaborate military maneuvers had failed to accomplish. It had convinced Hitler to defend the wrong place at the wrong time, setting up the conditions for an Allied victory that would reshape the entire course of the European war. When Operation Husky launched on July 10th, 1943, the results spoke louder than any intelligence assessment ever could. More than 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Sicily, expecting fierce resistance and finding instead an island stripped of its best defenders. The British had predicted 10,000 casualties in the first week of fighting. They suffered fewer than 1,500. The Royal Navy had prepared for the loss of 300 ships. They lost 12. What was supposed to be a brutal 90-day campaign ended in just 38 days of fighting. But the true measure of Operation Mincemeat's success wasn't found in casualty figures or battle statistics. It was found in the fact that even as Allied forces poured across Sicilian beaches, Hitler remained convinced that the real attack was yet to come. The master of Europe, the man who had conquered most of a continent through cunning and brutality, had been completely fooled by a homeless Welsh vagrant and 2 British intelligence officers with vivid imaginations. The ripple effects continued long after the last German defender fled Sicily. The rapid Allied victory contributed to the fall of Mussolini's government and Italy's eventual surrender. German forces that might have been reinforcing the Atlantic Wall were scattered across the Mediterranean. Most remarkably, Hitler even suspended his crucial offensive at Kursk, partly because he still believed he needed reserves available for the Balkan invasion that would never come. In the end, Operation Mincemeat stands as perhaps the most successful deception operation in military history, a testament to the power of human ingenuity over brute force. It proved that in warfare, as in life, the greatest victories sometimes belong not to the strongest or the bravest, but to those creative enough to make their enemies defeat themselves. Glyndwr Michael, forgotten in life and anonymous in death, had posthumously saved thousands of lives and changed the course of World War II. Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are the ones who never know they were heroes at all.